think it was 2 years ago, Ann, that you had me out. And I appreciate the opportunity to stop out and give you an update. I see former representative people here and current representative people here. And so it's good to see you gentlemen again. Thank you. So for those of you who don't know, WMC, let me hand this out first. Thank you. WMC is the state's Chamber of Commerce. It was actually formed as a merger of the State Manufacturers Association and the State Chamber in 1976. As far as I can tell, from 2 years on this job, there is no other state that has a similar merger of groups like that. So we certainly appreciate that, and I think it gives us a stronger basis on which to advocate on behalf of business before the legislature and the state regulatory agencies. We have about 3,500 member companies, and we also have many of the chambers of commerce across the state are also members of WMC. So we certainly appreciate the partnership we've had with Ann and with other folks around here in the Dane County area. So I wanted to give you a bit of an update on some things. I usually get to go longer than 20 minutes or so, but I'll try to make it fast here for you, Ann. But I want to give you an update on some of the things that have been happening in the current legislative session, and then some of the items that are still out there and some issues that we would hope to see advanced later in this session, although, well, I'll talk about that. So first of all, I just want to talk on some of the regular session items that were passed earlier this year by the state legislature. So the legislature does 2-year sessions. They start January of the odd number years, run into the spring of the even number years, and then things kind of let down and they go into campaign mode. And then you see Gary a lot more frequently. So anyhow, for our purposes, it's always important at the front end of the session. We'd like to get things out there, get the issues framed, so not just the legislature, but the public has a chance to digest the issues, talk about it, and move forward. One of the top issues we hear from our members, about half of our members are manufacturers, is a lack of skilled workers. We've got many of the shop floors I've had a chance to visit. The average age is between 55 and 57 years old of the skilled workers who are doing a lot of the machine operating. And that's, it's a real danger that we're at this point where we're not replacing fast enough the folks who have the skills to do so much of what Wisconsin does well. And manufacturing is really our super sector of our state economy. So hearing about this, I know legislators and the governor worked on this, what was called a fast forward legislation, which was to create a grant program whereby businesses could apply directly. Also, the educational institutions, particularly the tech colleges, can have further training programs to provide the education that's needed to fill all this needed skills gap that we need to fill, whether it's, especially in the technical area. We do have other areas with engineering and information technology where the UW system in particular can be very helpful in meeting gaps we have in those areas. But very broad bipartisan support for dealing with this skills gap issue. And so that was one of the first things that was done in the new legislative session. The second issue I have on my sheet is iron mining. The state of Wisconsin passed a moratorium on all metallic mining in the late 1990s. And so WMC worked to advocate on behalf of allowing iron mining to take place in northern Wisconsin. There's a particular project, which I'm sure you've probably all heard about. It straddles the border of Ashland and Iron County. And that is now in the application process. They have to do 2 field seasons of testing to see exactly where they want to do their borings and their drillings. Then they have to do the application, which is over a year process. So it's probably going to be about 2016 or later before they actually submit an application to the state DNR. So we'll see what happens with that. I mentioned venture capital. It's another issue. It's a smaller segment of folks who've been asking for it, but with just sort of what's happened nationally with lending restrictions and so forth coming out of the Great Recession, there's been a lot of pressure on finding capital for small businesses, and in particular for startup businesses that don't have a history with a given financial institution. And so, especially for this, it's not exclusive to Dane County, but with the biotech focus in Dane County, I know they didn't include biotech in legislation, but they had 5 areas, including advanced manufacturing and information technology and some other agricultural technology, where there are some strengths that we're hoping that this program is a $25 million allocation. So the state is just in the process now of hiring a private sector firm to manage the program on behalf of the state. And so we'll see what comes of that, but we certainly are optimistic that Wisconsin is behind in venture capital, the number of firms receiving it. And so we're hopeful that this really can make a difference and help spur job creation in Wisconsin. Briefly, I'm going to mention this transportation fund integrity, a constitutional amendment that you will all have an opportunity to vote on in November of next year, the next regular election, general election. And this stems from issues in the years past where there was some concern that funds that had been allocated to the state transportation fund were being used for other resources. And so a very broad group, including folks that use transportation like the manufacturers, but other folks including counties and local governments came together and wanted to keep those funds intact in the transportation fund. And so, so that amendment will be up. I don't know how controversial that will be, but that's one of the issues that will be for folks to consider next year. Moving on to the next page. This is my favorite area I get to talk about, because I'm the tax guy. So the state budget, we work closely with members of the legislature to advance a range of different tax proposals. The biggest of which, of course, was a reduction in the individual income tax to about $650 million in tax relief out of a budget that's about 70, well, general fund is about 35 billion dollar allocation. So that's a chunk of money that was earmarked for tax relief. And it is steered more toward the middle brackets of folks and to the lower end as well. So a lot of Wisconsin families and small businesses should see some benefit from that. I do want to mention that there are quite a few businesses. Nationally, it's 90% of businesses that pay tax not at the corporate level, but at the individual income level, because they're structured as a pass-through entity, so a LLC or an S corporation or a partnership. And that's something I find I have to tell, particularly a lot of public events and even with a number of members of the legislature. It's interesting. You would assume that businesses pay the corporate income, and increasingly that's less and less the case. So some of the other issues on the tax area, manufacturer's tax credit. It's actually called the manufacturing and agricultural credit, but I'm not the Farm Bureau, so I usually talk about the manufacturing side. This was a credit that was created 2 years ago, which is just taking effect now this year. And so if you're a producer of agricultural goods, or if you're a manufacturer under state law, you're eligible for a credit that offsets against your income tax liability. And so that is going to phase in over the next 4 years. So that begins this year. As we in Indiana are the two states that have the biggest percentage of our economy that's directly into manufacturing, we really think this will be very helpful and really hope to see investment and job creation here in Wisconsin as a result of it. So, so we'll keep our fingers crossed, see how that goes. R&D tax credit. Wisconsin has an R&D tax credit, but it was only for the C corporations, the traditional, many times older line businesses. So the legislature this year extended it to apply to those pass-through entities, LLCs and S-corps, which really should be a big benefit to a lot of folks who do research work here in Wisconsin. Again, we're hoping to see additional dollars come here that otherwise we may not have because of not being able to claim that credit in the past. Depreciation, there's, for those of you that deal with depreciation, it'll be a lot easier now just to have it federalized instead of having a separate set of books for the state level. And then there's a fee called the Economic Development Surcharge. It used to be a recycling surcharge that all businesses have to pay. It's a minimum of $25, maximum of $10,000. And so the legislature eliminated that also for the pass-through entities, which is helpful for folks in that situation. Some of the non-tax items considered in the budget. Air permitting, we had some issue where a lot of times the EPA and the DNR have to work together, and the EPA will encourage the DNR to adopt different changes. In this case, it's to continue financing their program that oversees the air permits that are issued statewide to the industries that are required to file for those. And we were very concerned because the way the budget the governor had introduced had a pretty heavy fee increase on particularly small manufacturers that have to get an air permit. And so it took a lot of effort, but we were glad to see that we were able to redistribute that a little bit more evenly so that the small manufacturers wouldn't bear as big of a burden on the fee increase that's now happening. So it's a lot more manageable. Unemployment insurance. A lot of you have probably heard a little bit about some of the issues that we've had in Wisconsin. I'm sure Joe's heard a little bit about that from it's businesses across the state have had issues with unemployment insurance. There were a number of changes, some adopted outside of the budget, but a number adopted within the budget process. And those include, we had a number of quit exceptions under which people could draw unemployment insurance. And those were reduced by half. Now there are 9 such exceptions, but that's still the largest number in the Midwest. And so I do think the issue, there probably won't be many more changes to UI after this session. 2 other things I wanted to mention with unemployment insurance. The last time I spoke with you guys 2 years ago, there was an impending tax increase because the state was still running a deficit in our unemployment insurance trust account. But we still are running a deficit, but the legislature set aside $26 million to cover that deficit, so there will not be an additional tax increase later this year on unemployment insurance. So it's a good thing that they did that. And then lastly, I did want to mention, they did create a new tax bracket that we weren't terribly excited about. It's going to end up hitting people who have a lot of employees who draw on unemployment. And there are companies that structure their business model essentially where they do have folks that draw regular on unemployment. We're not interested in making sure those people don't pay their fair share because they really should. But we have a number of manufacturers that had some steep layoffs during the recession, and it wasn't part of their business model. They got hammered pretty hard in the last 3-4 years. And so it's those folks that we'd like to see a little bit more leniency toward under that new tax bracket. So we'll be working toward that end. And then lastly, I want to mention infrastructure funding, which the legislature did and governor did plug. We have tremendous needs on our highway system. I know here in Dayton County, Highway 19, Stoughton Road, there's a third project that I think are in the environmental impacts that they're doing the study phase, but these really need to be done. There's a lot of capacity issues with it. I hate going on the Beltline during the workday, and I had to go to the west side the other day, and I sat for 20 minutes, going perhaps a mile and a half. And so those types of things I know they can be frustrating, but for business, when you're trying to move your good from one place to another, that really can be a great frustration, the congestion. And so we're hopeful to keep working toward those things. While there was no fee or tax increase talked about in this state budget, I do think there's going to be incredible pressure on not just Wisconsin, but virtually all states, because the federal government is not increasing the gas tax. And so we will have to have a discussion about what's the appropriate level of support that the citizens should be providing for the state transportation fund. And I think that's going to be, it'll probably be a couple of years, like I said, 2015 or so. But so just brace yourself. You're going to hear about all of area, not just gas tax, but vehicle miles traveled was discussed, and some registration fee increases. But we are short on what funds we need presently to finance our highway project, and that's a significant issue that we're going to have to figure out. Some of the issues that were dealt with earlier in the legislative session, the State Assembly worked on a number of different tort issues, including, I've got them listed here, there's a practice called phantom damages, which is what some call the issue where the billed amounts for an individual who's had a bodily injury, the jury in those types of cases, they never see the billed amount, they see the billed amount, not the actual amount. And so it's that discrepancy where there's some interest in trying to let the jury see both numbers. And so we'll see if something happens with that. There are industry groups that aren't on the same page with this, so the issue has sort of been set on the sideline. There's an issue with asbestos trust funds. There's about 60 or so trusts which were created nationwide by companies that had manufactured asbestos or products with asbestos in them and ended up in the workplace. And we have a number of manufacturers, given our history here in Wisconsin, who now have been the subject to some suits from people who were damaged by or who have come up with mesothelioma. And of course, that's a terrible disease to have, and from that work condition. But the concern is that these solvent companies that are manufacturers didn't, they had a product containing asbestos in their workplace, but they didn't actually manufacture that product. And so our concern is that the trusts which were set up to pay those types of claims are filed with first before someone would then sue a solvent manufacturer operating in Wisconsin. So not to say that there's not a responsibility on the part of the Wisconsin business, but we don't want to bear more burden than what is rightfully belongs to the Wisconsin businesses. And last I'll mention, there's a transparency on private attorney contracts. This deals with when the state government goes out and hires private attorneys. The only instance I know that this happened was with the tobacco lawsuit that took place in the 1990s. And this would establish some criteria by which the state government would engage in those types of contracts, which currently there really is nothing existing to dictate how that works. And then lastly, our state lemon law. So when you buy a vehicle which is a lemon, we have the most, well, for the consumer, it's very liberal, but for the manufacturer, it's very restrictive in terms of having to, it's double the value of the vehicle the manufacturer has to pay out to the consumer. And we'd like to think it sends a better message for our business climate to be a little more in line with what the other states provide, which would be going back to the value of the vehicles, what the manufacturer should replenish or pay back to the consumer. And there's some other changes as well, but that's really the heart of the issue. So, last couple slides here. Upcoming issues. At WMC, we have heard from members for a number of years about differences in human resources law. And the biggest of those is the Family Medical Leave Act. Governor Thompson signed Wisconsin. We had the first, this is what we do so often in Wisconsin, we passed the FMLA law in 1988. And President Clinton signed the federal version 5 years later, 1993. And there's been no effort to reconcile the two laws since that time. And so that's created confusion that still exists, even though it's been 20 years now, where there's difficulty for the employer to determine what set of facts or what criteria should be used in determining family leave. There's a number of other issues as well. I was talking with our HR director earlier, who was telling me that if you're a salaried employee, you have to
I have to go vote on drunk driving issues, so.
You do, that's right.
You're doing a great job.
Thank you. It's really fun having to deal with legislators. There's really a great group of people that the voters send to us. So, and Gary's one of them. So, well, where was I? I was at FMLA. So this guy was telling me that if you're a salaried employee, under the state rules, you have to report your lunch hours that you work or don't work in. And we actually have a case right now where a number of businesses in Green Bay are being audited by the State Department of Workforce Development for their salaried workers taking lunchtime. How many hours a day? And that's just crazy. It's really not an essential function of state government. And so we're looking to reform some of those things and really federalize to the degree that we can. So we'll see if the legislature really has an appetite to take this on, because of course it could become a hot button issue. Workers' compensation. I talked about unemployment insurance before. Workers' compensation, also there's a council that exists, which is half management, which WMC sits on, and then it's half labor. So the private sector labor unions, we have negotiated with them over changes for quite a while. And in fact, on unemployment, it was controversial because the legislature went around that process as part of the budget on unemployment. Well, workers' comp, we're still working through the council process, which we're very pleased with. We think it's appropriate to, instead of having wild changes that take place in the policies for UI and workers' comp, it really makes sense to have that agreement and have stability for those systems as long as possible. So there's a large recognition that for those of you who have to look at your workers' comp and your health insurance, you'll see that for the same, especially for healthcare costs under workers' comp, they very much are much higher than what you can negotiate with your health insurer. And so we'd like to see some cost containment done. We've actually been working fairly close with labor on that. And obviously there's folks that have different interests in that. So we'll see ultimately what comes before the legislature, but that's an issue that we would like to have resolved. Felony conviction records. This is one we've had on our agenda to deal with for quite a while. We're one of a handful of states that creates a protected class under our fair employment law if you have a felony conviction. So just like being your gender, you can't be discriminated on based on gender, based on military service, based on religious belief, those types of things. Felony conviction status is one of those issues, and we hear particularly from a lot of smaller family businesses that are concerned about having people in the workplace. There are some exceptions under the current law, but sometimes they get really murky as to who can be hired or not. And there's some litigation issues that arise from those things not being resolved. Crowdfunding. I talked before about the shortage of capital. This is a new thing that the Congress last year passed some legislation allowing this crowdfunding to take place, which is a different way of financing a small, well, typically a startup operation. And this is, only one state has taken advantage of, I think it's Maryland, of the federal ability to do this. So Wisconsin, there's a serious push to do this this fall, to create the ability to have crowdfunding where ideally, or from what it sounds, if you're a small operation, you're having difficulty finding financing, this will be the ticket to help you out potentially if you get connected with the right people. And so we're working on creating that new vehicle. And then lastly, I've got a few issues that I don't know the legislature will want to take on during this session. I think they've had enough with iron mining, but there's additional issues dealing with groundwater. There was a state Supreme Court decision that rewrote a chunk of the state's, how the groundwater issues are treated. And so especially for the ag industry, for the paper industry, for a number of folks that use a lot of water, they're very concerned about some things the court did. And so the legislature is looking at altering those laws a bit further. That mining moratorium I mentioned at the beginning, well, it doesn't apply for everything else. And so we have, specifically, there's some copper and some gold deposits in the northern part of the state, which there is some interest in developing, but we're unable to do so because of the moratorium that exists. Perhaps 20 miles across the border from Iron County into Michigan, so the county next to us, there isn't a copper mine that was just approved that's being constructed today. And so part of our thing is why isn't Wisconsin competing for that type of business? Of course, that's also controversial as well because of all the issues involved with mining. And then lastly, there's some phosphorus issues similar to the water issue. This is one of those issues between the DNR and the EPA where they were trying to work out some arrangements on those who have phosphorus discharges. Again, the paper folks, some agriculture folks as well. There's some confusion, or there's some interest in having a little bit easier of restrictions for industry to abide by. And I don't know that the legislature is going to want to take that on, but it's one of the things that we're talking about. So that is like my, very quick, here's what we're working on that I didn't want to go into more detail, but I'd be happy to take questions from you guys. Yes, please.
You talked about the fact that we don't have a lot of trained workers to fill some of these positions that are aging people are. I used to teach, and one of the things that always got cut was that program in the high school. And you didn't mention any funding for the high schools, because it seems to me that that's where we have to start. If those kids can't get into that in high school, they're probably not going to pursue that out of high school. How do we get those programs more priority in the high school?
That's very true. I live in Watertown, and our tech ed teacher in Watertown, he actually goes to my church, which is great, Jesse Dillmer, he runs a great program. Now, he's done a really good job of getting into the local, we have about 6 big manufacturers in Watertown, and so he has a direct relationship with them. In fact, one of them just provided a $25,000 robot arm that the kids can learn how to work, because these companies have figured out, if we help the teacher teach the kids what we do, we get the workers afterwards. And so that type of model, I know in Brilliant, the Aaron's company has done a similar type of thing. Some of these manufacturers even get in at the middle school level. And so there really does need to be a lot more dialogue on a statewide basis between, it is before the tech college. So getting to the kids, and it's not just the kids, it's the parents of the kids who assume that every manufacturing facility is dark, dirty, and dangerous, which was true 30 years ago, but is not so true today. You can find those places, but that is the exception now. Compared to so much of what we manufacture or how we manufacture. So you're right, it has been one of those things that did get cut a lot. I think it was seen as something rather expendable because people were thinking kids don't need to go into those lines of work. Well, now we're at the point where we have a lot more people needed there than we do with 4-year degrees, And so it's a challenge for us and for a lot of manufacturers and frankly for a lot of educational establishments to get the kids interested in going that route.
Well, I think even kids that are interested can't get into the programs because
there's so few spots.
Yeah.
I'm amazed the youth apprenticeship program. The kids that are in there, it's funny to talk with some of our manufacturer members, and they fight for these kids because there's so few of them, and they want these kids. And one guy in Sussex I talked to, he actually created his own program, Hamilton High School over there. He hired the former shop teacher who was let go. This guy hired the guy, brought him in-house. He trains every semester. He's got, I think it's 6 kids they bring in. And then, if they break the rules or whatever, the owner gets rid of the kid. But otherwise, they train these kids. He keeps 2 of them. And then the 2 to 4 other ones, he has other manufacturers pay him a portion of the teacher's salary, and they fan him out. And I'm like, wow, that's really remarkable. But that's the kind of thing where ideally we would be doing that already through the regular school system. So, but yeah, it's definitely a huge issue, and more people are getting in tune that they have to do something about it. Other questions? Steve?
Jason, you mentioned the state is low on funds when it comes to the highway projects that we have, and we can look as consumers to pay a lot more money in the future when it comes to gas.
Probably not a lot more.
But more nonetheless. My question is, has WMC or the state researched any areas that can be cut before we go looking to the taxpayer right away?
I was on a panel for Congressman Ribble from Green Bay a month ago, must have been. And I made sure, because I had the Deputy Secretary of DOT was there with me, and I made sure to make that point that, especially with the last federal highway bill, they gave leeway for the planning purposes, because a lot of times the planning is drug out for so many years, and that drives up costs in itself. And so I think that there are things we can do, but today I can't articulate what those are. But I think before the legislature or the governor can ask the public for more funding, I think it has to be proven that everything that can be done to reduce expenditures that are not harming the construction, cutting out waste, that has to be proven first. And that's kind of my message. I'm actually planning my next column for our magazine to talk about exactly that, because yeah, we really do. I mean, this is a big deal, and people just aren't focused on it yet, but it's going to come up and face us all. And at that point, it'd just be really good to have thought through it coolly. And a lot of times, some of these decisions, former representative people, a lot of the decisions will be made about a big issue like transportation funding. The 2 finance co-chairs or the 2 leaders of the legislature will come up with a deal, right? And it'll just happen, and then that's the law. And a lot of times that stands for 20, 30 years. And this is one of those issues where we want to make sure things are thought through deliberately before the policy decision is reached. Yes?
Just want to,
I probably went over a half hour. Huh?
just want to give Joe a chance
Oh.
to speak.
Joe, are you here? See, he sat behind me. All right, anyway, thank you for letting me blab at you.